Thank you. Actually, today I'm presenting on my study that I've conducted on women who returning to work after depression. And this study is called Getting Back in the Game, how these women return to work after being off for a period of time. Just in the beginning, I'd like to tell you I'm from Atlantic Canada. The province that I'm from, New Brunswick, borders Maine of the U.S., and I teach at the University of New Brunswick, which is one of the oldest universities in Canada, and it's a beautiful campus on the side of a hill, and with all our red brick buildings, it's really quite lovely. And of course, this is an autumn picture. So, getting on to the topic of depression, and first of all, I want to look at what is in the literature about depression. And we know that it's an urgent and complex issue of the day. We're hearing about it more and more and more. It's a leading cause of disease worldwide, and it's a major cause of missed work time. In fact, 70% of 1 million Canadians with depression are working. But even though they're working, their productivity plummets. It's very difficult for them. There's more lost work days than any other medical condition, and it's 5 to 10 times more common than other diseases. And the thing about depression is the episodes are so long-lasting. The women in my study were off from work anywhere from 3 months to several years because of the depression, so it's very long-lasting. It affects more women than men at a ratio of 2 to 1, and I question whether that may be due to the multiple roles that women find themselves in. So the purpose of my study, it's a grounded theory study, and it is to expand our gender-based knowledge, inform policy and practice by exploring the experiences and implications of workplace reentry for women's health and well-being following a lapse in employment due to depression. The methodology, as I mentioned before, it's a grounded theory study. I interviewed 40 women who have returned to work after a depression. And I used an interview guide, but it was very much a conversational event. I did a pilot project with 10 women, and I used convenience and purposeful sampling techniques. I put posters around in key areas, like in the entryway of pharmacies, in hospitals, in doctors' offices, any place that I thought women might see it. But most of the response that I got was from ads I put in the newspaper recruiting women. And I thought at the time maybe I would get into difficulty because I thought if these women are feeling so depressed, will they respond to an ad? But in fact, they did. They were so desperate to talk to somebody that I would get these calls with these very depressed-sounding women, but just so eager to have someone that they could tell their story to. So the sample included women from universities, hospitals, government offices, retail businesses, teachers, etc., etc. And I set out not to find out about women in one workplace. I wanted a cross-section of participants. So in the end, there were 40 English-speaking women over the age of 19 who had returned to work following a depression. The ages ranged from 23 to 64, with the mean age being 46.5. There were 19 single and 21 married. There was 1 First Nation or Aboriginal woman and 5 Francophone women who could still participate in the English interview. 10 were mothers. They were currently employed full-time, part-time, or seasonally, and they had all been off from work for at least a 3-month period. So the interviews were audio recorded. They were transcribed verbatim, and I used a data analysis program, NVivo. And I did line-by-line coding and constant comparison, and I arrived at categories and at theories. So let's talk about the depression experience. What did women tell me about this experience? Invariably, they talked and described it as being like a black hole, and I've seen that in the literature as well, but they really commonly referred to it as that. They talked about the overwhelming fatigue and sadness that they experienced. They had poor memory and an inability to concentrate, and so you can see how this would pose a problem if in fact they're in the workplace. They had changes in eating and personal grooming, and they just had a general disinterest in activities of daily living. Participant 16 said, "I was a person that did a lot of crafts and socialized a lot, and I kind of regressed to my bedroom and just didn't want to get dressed. I was tired." And throughout the rest of this presentation, I'm going to share a lot of quotations with you because I think they're powerful in describing what the women had to say. "I can just be driving along and I see black figures along the road. It's just a figure of a person, no face or anything, but it is like they are waving, beckoning me, and I just want to give up." And this woman talked about having been very suicidal and how this beckoning her was such a struggle for her. So what was it like at work? Depression and work. Well, they found it really difficult to get up in the mornings, to get out of bed. And they said they lived on the couch. They just kind of migrated to the couch and stayed there. They got really behind at work. And that, for example, if they were in an office where there was an email, they got behind in the email. They avoided social contact. And you'll see a little bit later, this becomes very problematic because they also talk about being very isolated, but at the same time, they avoid the contact. They talked about having to put on a face, and almost every participant that I interviewed talked about putting on a face or wearing a mask. They had to hide what their true feelings and their way of being was. They felt that they had to smile and act happy in order to keep people around them happy. And that became a real struggle, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. They were overwhelmed by the amount of work. They couldn't focus, and they had no attention span. As this participant says, "A lot of the girls I work with were like, 'What do you mean she's in the hospital? She just worked yesterday.' But I was very good at hiding it. I think I just got tired of hiding it. I was mentally exhausted. I just could not get out of bed. I had no energy and felt very hopeless. I was suicidal, just all of those symptoms of depression." And so they really needed to be off from work. "I felt put into a corner a lot and bullied a lot and a lot of guilt, so my work performance went down. Face to face, my manager was supportive, but it was fake. Because my illness went on, she started to get impatient with me. It was like, 'You need to be getting over it. Hurry up.' So again, because it was such a long-lasting illness, this manager became really perplexed and unable to continue to offer support. When the women finally went off work and went on long-term disability, there was a relief that they didn't have to go out of their house because they just wanted to hide themselves in their houses. They didn't have to put on that face or mask anymore. They could be themselves. There was no more acting. However, they were worried about what people would think. And they said there was little or no contact from work. They didn't hear from anybody, even colleagues who they had been quite close with. I worry a lot about what other people are thinking and how things are going too. I feel guilty for being off. Another participant. Now that I'm off, I don't have the guilt of calling in sick all of the time. I can focus on my health. So it's difficult calling in sick all the time, and yet they felt they had to. So returning to work, they needed a gradual return to work because their memory was poor and they weren't able to focus really well. There was no support. They talked about if I had had a broken leg, people would have been offering me support. But because it's mental illness, there wasn't anything forthcoming. Once you're back, the work is piled on as if you're fixed. And that was really problematic because many of them returned before they had fully recovered. And it was very difficult to have work piled on as if they were 100%. The other extreme to that is they were sometimes put at a desk with nothing to do. Sometimes their employer took a completely different stance and didn't want to burden them, but they didn't feel very good about themselves if they were at a desk with nothing to do. This woman said, "I'm at the end of a hallway and I don't see anyone. I only see them if they go to the photocopier. I have nothing to do and no one to talk to. It is very strange. A broken down boardroom chair that I'm sitting on and a 1960s desk." And I guess I included this quotation because the women invariably talked about while they were off, their offices were often taken away from them. They were moved into corridors or into offices that didn't have access to other people. And in one way, you can understand this because if somebody's off for 2 or 3 years, the employer is going to use that space for others. But that was really difficult for women to lose what they saw was theirs and part of their identity. So barriers to returning to work. Well, there's stigma and discrimination, and it flies well. There's lots of stigma and discrimination. There's fear of self-disclosing, and there's concentration and memory issues. The stigma, because once you're tagged with mental illness, you're a problem to the corporation. You are either going to be laid off or fired, or you are just seen as somebody that cannot handle responsibility, that's too fragile. I cannot tell you the amount of prejudice in the workplace. One person that I told that I was off for anxiety and depression said, "Oh yeah, we're all stressed here, but we don't get to take the summer off." So really non-supportive. There were benefits to returning to work, and some of those benefits included economics, because many of these women went off on long-term disability, and after a certain period of time, that economic remuneration disappeared because they had been off for so long. So they may not have been getting any kind of pay, or their sick time may have run out. So economically, it was beneficial to return to work. Structure they found helpful in recovery, the structure of work. If they weren't burdened with too much work, it was helpful for them to get back. And it also combated the social isolation. Although, as you will see as I go on, even when they returned to work, there was still a fair amount of social isolation. One of the reoccurring themes in my study was battling adversity. These women constantly felt like they were in battle. They battled the depression, and that was a daily battle of trying to self-talk and helping to feel better. They battled the workplace because they didn't have support in the workplace. They battled the institution, and by that I mean they may have battled policies where, for example, long-term disability was shortened. Everywhere they went, there was an institutional focus rather than on the person. Whether that was the institution they worked in, the workplace, or the healthcare system, they all seemed institutionally focused. So battling adversity, this participant said, "I was told by the insurance company that I had to return to work or my benefits would be cut off. I wasn't ready, but I went back. After my 30-day progressive return, I met with Human Resources, and they told me that my corporate values differed from theirs and that they were laying me off. Then the security guard accompanied me back to my office, and I picked up my stuff. They gave me $25,000 to shut up. I was disgusted but too weak to fight them. Pretty horrific. Another reoccurring theme was the active practice of silence. And the women contributed to this silence because they concealed their depression. They didn't feel safe in disclosing that they were depressed. If they did disclose, it was very strategic. Maybe to somebody that they were close to, definitely to their employer, but they didn't always feel support from that. And there was secrecy within the workplace. Nobody ever came to say, "How are you doing? Is there anything I can do now that you're back to make things better?" There was secrecy. Nobody talked. It was very hush-hush. And that's a bit of a dilemma because in many workplaces, confidentiality is critical and essential, but in this case, it just contributes to the problem. This participant said, "So I didn't tell them I had a depression. I just told them I had surgery. It's easier that way. I didn't disclose. I had taken some time off, and so they knew I was taking off for sick reasons. Initially, it was just vacation days and stuff like that, and in all honesty, I wasn't getting any support." And this person says, "Yeah, it's the silence. If I had arthritis, they would be saying, 'Hey, you want to check out this book or that site?' But with depression, it is so silent. Nobody says anything." Part of my depression was a feeling of loneliness, and so I'm still feeling lonely with my work environment. I've been back now for 3 weeks. Nobody has come down to my office to see how I'm doing. So, getting back in the game. How do we get back in the game of work? For the employee, they may have to indulge in self-disclosure. That's difficult because they've worn this mask or worn this face for so long and pretended that things were okay. But perhaps it would be better if they self-disclosed. They need to slowly return to work. It needs to be a slow, gradual return so that they can eventually be able to deliver on their abilities. There needs to be some limit setting. They can't take on everything. They can do a defined amount of work. They need to continue with their medications and their treatments and be committed to that. And they need to engage in a lot of positive self-talk, which can be difficult. For the employer, there needs to be an openness to talk and an openness to learn about mental illness, and in particular, in this case, depression. They need to recognize that a slow, gradual response or return is important. There needs to be a reduced workload. And there needs to be regular meetings with the employee to see how they're managing their workload and to know when that can increase or if it needs to be decreased. The employer needs to create a positive work environment and provide ongoing support. One of the actions I've taken as a result of this study is to go out and meet in various workplaces, to talk to human resources and to talk to employers about the needs of employees when they're experiencing depression. And I think we can't do enough of that, of trying to spread this word and trying to educate people on what it's like to be returning to work after a depression. One of the women in my study drew this picture, and it shows the woman with the multiple masks on. And I too am going to end with a poem. that relates to nursing, but relates to these women wearing a mask. Nurse, nurse, you may not see me, but I am here. Nurse, if you want me to be happy, I'll put on a smile. If you think I'm sad, I'll put on that face too. You see, I have many faces. I aim to please. Nurse, nurse, do you want to see the real me? Come sit with me. Hold my hand. Let me know that you care. Let me know that you want in. Nurse, I want to be seen. Thank you very much.